10 minutes before our break. Good chance for other folks to get into it. Do you want to?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah.
Very.
I knew you were waiting. You probably had 10 questions since I started.
No. There was I think it was in the one by Adam. The topic came up, and you agreed that your conjectures were testable. That there was some way of.
Not all the conjectures, of
No,
course.
do you have? Can you give an example of what experiment might be done to
Oh, so
validate?
some of the questions I had. Does the autogenic story, creating an autogenic system, does it create information with respect to its world as aboutness? Is it a source of aboutness in a way that individual isolated chemical processes are not?
But is there a specific experiment that could be done to test whether that?
Exactly. So in effect, it's also the question about the normativity. That is, are there things that a device like this, and I say device, it's not a device, in fact, it's something other than a device in some ways, but a system like this, can it make mistakes? What is a mistake? A mistake can now be defined because you have a system that identifies its own boundedness. In physics and chemistry, in ecology, whatever, when we talk about a system, we impose what we say, these are the bounds that I'm going to talk about, everything else is outside of that, this is inside of that. The autogenic system and a living organism is a process, is a system that defines its boundaries. Its boundaries are internally generated and created. They're not physical boundaries necessarily, that's what I was trying to get at. But I think they're created. And because of that, you have self and other. And simply by looking at the system, I don't think there's something else you have to say. Because of that, there can be things that destroy it, things that help it, that it will be working against what it's not. In a sense, so I think that this is why I think it's a thought experiment that it's itself, by the thought experiment, empirical. So I think there's a number of things. I made a long list yet last night. I won't go through it now. But I think that each one of those, they're very minimal. I'm not talking about mental stuff yet. But what we see in life. The kind of things we say, this is the teleology, this is the purposiveness that living things have. In a sense that is not parasitic on something outside.
Other voices, questions?
Given your autogenic system and its characteristic of perdurance and its constant conflict with the second law, can your autogenic system die?
Yes, absolutely.
And how would it do that?
For example, it gets broken open in a context where there's too few substrates to start the process up again. Clearly can die. So it could. Now this is important because what it says is that this is something that can be created and destroyed. The information, the aboutness, the self-boundedness can be created and destroyed, just like life can be, because it's like life. The advantage of this simple system, however, is that it can, unlike a whirlpool or some other self-organizing process, it can persist across environments that are not conducive to its persistence, to its perdurance. So that by virtue of closure, it may have sucked up all the raw materials in its local environment. But now that it's static, not doing anything, it's possible that diffusion will now bring those things back in, if they're generally in the environment. Or if dozens of them are replicated, and the environment is maybe irregular and poor in some of these, diffusion will cause those to sort of be dispersed around these alternatives. One has a better chance of opening up again in a useful environment. So a self-organized system, because it runs until it stops, can't do that. It can't persist. This has two kinds of perdurance in that sense. It perdures with respect to the second law, and yet it can be destroyed because of that. Because the second law is always capable of winning, in this case. And the second thing is it can perdure even in the context where the world is not on its side, so to speak, where the other is not conducive. That, I think, is a unique feature. And again, it's a few very simple features that we see in living things that we don't see in non-living things.
Okay, time for one more question?
The idea you brought up about final causality,
Mhm.
it seems similar to what Teilhard de Chardin spoke about in terms of the omega point, that it's the future. You talk about the future in futura. How would you see what you're talking about is different from what?
That's a great question. I mean, so first of all, I don't have a sense of ultimate final causality. This is a story of proximate final causality. And final causality that has a locus in a particular place, in a particular system, that can be created and destroyed. Now, I think that what that does is if that final causality can be complexified and multiplied, it can extend into the universe in extraordinary ways, can be much larger than its original simple locus. In fact, in life on Earth, I think it begins in very, very minuscule loci, and now has covered the whole planet, and may indeed expand out into our solar system at some point. Final causality, I think, can grow. I think that's the whole power of final causality, is it can grow. Whereas non-final causal processes, morphodynamic or self-organizing processes, always are self-destructive. They always wear themselves out and burn themselves out. So this is crossing another threshold. There's a threshold here that makes this a very interesting transition point. Is it Desjardins' omega point? No. I would resist that. Because unless I could be convinced that the cosmos as a whole has some of these systemic principles, then I might be willing to say that. Because what I've done is I've tried to generate final causality out of certain principles and say, now you didn't see it here, now you see it here. Because of these relationships, it emerged. If those relationships are present in a society, then there's a social self. If those relationships are present in the entire world ecosystem, then there's a Gaia. If they're not, it's not there. If it's not in the whole cosmos, I wouldn't want to put the omega point on it.
Okay, let's thank all our folks today.